This is a station identification moment. You're listening to CPR Worldwide Media, a division of CPR Media Network, coming to you live right across the planet. Check out our website at www.cprworldwidemedia.com and our Facebook page at facebook.com/CPR Worldwide Media. This is CPR Media Network, coming to you live from the USA.
Well, looky here, a new listener. Hey, this ain't your little sister's radio station.
How are things with the new guy?
All we do is go out to dinner.
That's it?
I mean, he picks up the tab every time, which is great.
Why? He's using you. He probably has a city thank you card and he gets 2 times the points at restaurants.
So he's just racking up points with me.
Some people.
Ugh.
No, I got it.
The Citi Thank You Preferred Card. Now earn 2 times the points on dining out and entertainment with no annual fee. To apply, go to Citi.com/thankyoucards.
It's not about how many miles you can get out of the C-Max Hybrid. It's about how much life you can fit into it. The Ford C-Max Hybrid, with an EPA estimated range of 540 miles on a tank of gas, and all the room you need to enjoy the trip. Go stretch out. Go further.
Read something recently worth thinking about. It's the soldier, not the campus organizer, who's given us freedom to demonstrate. It's the soldier, not the reporter, who's given us freedom of the press. It's the soldier, not the poet, who's given us freedom of speech. It's the soldier who serves under the flag, who defends the protesters' right to burn the flag. Isn't it time now to demonstrate that we support our troops? Were it not for the brave, there'd be no land of the free.
Fred Thompson's message was brought to you by CitizensUnited.org.
Welcome to the State Legislators Roundtable. Your host will be Charles Kacprowicz, Executive Director of Citizen Initiatives and Countermand Amendment. Our special legislator guests will be discussing important issues in their states that relate to federal encroachment on states' rights. The nonpartisan Article 5 single-issue Countermand Amendment can remedy many states' issues peacefully without the consent of Congress, the courts, or the executive branch. We will reclaim our constitutional republic soon. The nonpartisan Countermand Amendment is the missing piece of the Article 5 puzzle. Our nation is coming apart at the seams, so we are countermanding.
Welcome, folks, to the State Legislators Roundtable. I am Charles Kacprowicz, Executive Director for Citizen Initiatives and the Countermand Amendment. Roundtable discussions with state legislators and community leaders center around critical issues in the states as they relate to federal encroachment on states' rights and how the nonpartisan Countermand Amendment can remedy them safely and quickly. This is not a gotcha forum. We are not here to back our guests into a corner. We encourage serious discussions of issues important to our guests and their states. Subjects can include taxation, criminal law, energy policies, healthcare, social issues, federal land grabs, court decisions, education, executive orders, unfunded liabilities, EPA, BLM, and much more. We will learn how to protect our enumerated rights in the First, Second, Fourth, and Fifth Amendments, and how the states and their citizens can identify, define, and protect their unenumerated rights in the Ninth and Tenth Amendments peacefully and permanently. Roundtable members tonight are Sandy Toth, our Executive Coordinator and Georgia State Director, Mike Coons out of Alaska, National Director and Alaska State Director, and Kelly Gordon, National Coordinator, Texas State Director and Producer. There are now 14 sponsored states for our nonpartisan Article 5 Countermand Amendment. We expect 2 more states to sponsor the amendment shortly. We could have a total of 20 states sponsoring the amendment in the next 30 days. We have had the honor of meeting We have had the honor of meeting over 60 state legislators through the roundtable this year. We have met some of the finest statesmen our nation has produced. We have also had a great deal of fun interviewing many of them. Our program has been growing. We have become one of the fastest growing talk shows on the internet. Recently, our listening audience grew to 50,000 listeners, with 55 affiliated radio stations rebroadcasting the roundtable live. To learn more about the Countermand Amendment, go to countermands.us. Also, call your friends and associates. Tell them to tune in to this show at cprworldwidemedia.com/live-radio. They will be able to participate in our online chat as well. Tonight's special guest is the Honorable Representative Chris Kopanga from the great state of Wisconsin. Representative Kopanga chaired the historic Mount Vernon Assembly earlier this year. Legislators from 33 states met at Mount Vernon to explore how state legislatures can restore our constitutional republic safely and quickly under Article 5 of the United States Constitution. Their work is ongoing, and the third legislative assembly is scheduled for December. Representative Kopanga serves on the following Wisconsin legislative committees: Constitution and Ethics Committee, which he co-chairs; Financial Institutions Committee, he is the vice chair; the Health Committee, Jobs, Economy, and Mining Committee, and the Labor Committee. He's a pretty busy fellow. Representative Kopanga, I welcome you to the State Legislators Roundtable. It is my great honor to have you as our special guest. You are free to present any matter of importance to you and your state as they relate to federal encroachment on states' rights. Thank you for joining tonight's roundtable.
Thank you, Charles. I appreciate you having me on and excited to talk through some issues. Thanks for all the work that you do for the Countermand Amendment and just really states' rights. And it sounds like you've had some great previous discussions with some of my associates. Most recently, Senator Lundberg and Representative Yvette Harrell from New Mexico.
We did, and we also just recently had Senator Emery from Missouri. And
sure.
He's been one of your supporters also. So we've had quite a few. We have John Overington from West Virginia and a number of them from Alaska. So we've had some good participation with many of the folks that you work with up there in the assembly that you are involved in.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's great. Well, maybe what I'll do is I'll start out with just a little bit of history on how the Mount Vernon Assembly came about. And also just, okay, where we're at now and what kind of the focus is going to be going forward. So, the Mount Vernon Assembly actually was something that came through as we were working in the state of Wisconsin, on the Constitution and Ethics Committee. We kept having people come and ask about Article 5, and as you're very familiar, there's a lot of different applications out there, both on the left and on the right of the political spectrum. And as we began to look into it, we realized that obviously nobody has ever been successful at this effort. So we wanted to dive in and find out why is it that this has failed, because it's an interesting thing to have something come up from both sides and it still can't get through. So as we looked back into the history of it, we realized that before people even can start arguing about subject matter on an Article 5 amendment, it always seems to fall apart because of the unknowns. So we said, what can we do to address that issue? So what we did is we essentially started talking with different legislators from different states who are leaders in this area, and we said, why don't we get together as state legislatures and start talking about how would an Article 5 convention to amend actually function? What would be the rules? What would be the procedures? Let's start getting into that and lay that out so we don't keep running into this hurdle of, well, how would it all function? And I'm sure you guys have talked a lot about the runaway convention concept that's out there. There's a big concern about a rewrite.
Yeah. We have indeed.
Yeah. So we said, well, if you read through Article 5, it's very clear that the Founding Fathers said, listen, we need to put a process together where the states have a nice, kind of a way to get through without having the impedance of the federal government. And as you probably have heard, Federalist 85, Alexander Hamilton actually talks about it, where he says that basically there is no way for Congress to step in on any matter that is left to the discretion of Congress. So we said, well, if the Founding Fathers gave us the clear direction in Article 5 as state legislatures, then we have a right, not just a right, but a responsibility to step forward and say how it's going to happen. So, another neat thing as we were going through this, actually. Go ahead.
Representative I agree with you 100%. Go on, please.
Yeah, no, it was interesting because the timing of this happened all around when me and my family went out to for a family vacation out to Washington, D.C., and we went to Mount Vernon. And as you're probably aware, George Washington had a huge impact in bringing the Philadelphia Convention together in 1787. So we were at Mount Vernon, and just, you know, have you ever been to Mount Vernon, Charles?
Yes, I have been. I'm sorry. I was.
Yeah, that's okay.
I was, and I enjoyed every moment of it, especially going through Washington's home.
Yes, I would encourage anybody who has not been there. It is an absolute must-see. Put it on the bucket list, especially with a family. My kids really enjoyed it. But we see how George Washington, the part that he played, the Philadelphia Convention actually started the whole concept back in 1785 when George Washington wanted to get together with Maryland and Virginia because they had some waterway issues. And so he rode all over the countryside and had a very hard time, from what I understand, pulling together state legislators or leaders from the two states. Let's get together, talk about this issue, and get it resolved. And the result of that was the Mount Vernon Compact from 1785. And what's really neat is, as those guys were talking, they said, you know, this is a great idea. We should do this with more states because we know we've got some problems with our federal government.
Yes.
And so what happened is they said, let's get together again in 1786, a year later, and that's, as you're probably familiar, the Annapolis Convention took place.
I do remember that, yes. I wasn't there, of course, but I do know from history. Well, I wasn't either, so that's good. There ended up being 5 states that came to Annapolis, and they just felt, hey, you know what, we don't have a majority here, so we don't feel like we have the authority, therefore, to really make any decisions for the nation as a whole, so let's make another effort of it, and that's actually how 1787 came together, is the Annapolis Convention. Actually, Virginia drafted an invitation, and this time, 12 of the 13 states showed up, and the rest is amazing history in what happened in Philadelphia. Agreed.
So that's the history of, as we saw this, we thought, you know, George Washington saw that there's a building concept that takes place, and it takes a little bit of time, but as you get states starting to talk together, they recognize the power of it. And it just over the last 200 years, we have lost that connection as states because, as you're very aware, over the course of history, in, you know, whether it was Rome or Greece, the federal government slowly, or the national government slowly gains power, and that leads to a situation where we're at today. That's why you guys are doing the Countermand Amendment. That's why we're doing Mount Vernon Assembly, which is now the Assembly of State Legislatures. So that's the history behind what drove us to pull this together. So where we're at now is we had our first meeting at Mount Vernon, which was an extreme honor. We were actually able to go into the new library there that was built a couple of years ago, and it's invite only, so the public cannot get in that building. And they took us in to see George Washington's private library, I actually saw the copy of the Constitution that he got and made his personal notes on.
Yes.
It was an amazing experience. And we had 99 people attend from 33 states, which was really surprised us at how well attended it was. Then we actually met in June. We got together in Indianapolis. Senator David Long, who is the Senate President in Indianapolis, opened up the Capitol to us. He's on the executive committee with me. And what we did there is we actually started, we said, let's lay out all of the issues that we have as part of the process. So there's little things like, well, where should this convention actually take place? You know, should it take place in Washington, D.C.? Should it take place at a state capitol? Nobody's really ever laid that out before, so we actually laid out about, I think the total number of items to determine were 50 or 60 items that we figured out. We have to determine what the answers are. So in Indianapolis, we kicked that off. We laid out, created a couple of committees, Judiciary Committee and the Planning Committee and then the Rules Committee. And those three committees, we broke these items down, and we've got the different legislators from across the country working on those right now, so that when we come to our next meeting, which is going to be in Washington, D.C., December 8th and 9th, we're going to review what the committees have done and essentially lay out, just like if you look back at how the Constitutional Convention in 1787 worked, we're essentially the committee of detail right now, bringing it back to the committee of the whole, and then once we have enough states, again, we want to make sure we have a majority of states so we have some authority with this. We'll actually go through and adopt these as a body and essentially hand them to, if a convention for proposing amendments would take place. When that takes place, this can be used as a guide for them, so all this work is done and it can really focus in on the issue of whatever the substance is of the amendment or amendments that they will be debating as part of the convention. So that's a story of how it came to be, what we're doing.
Yes.
And we're very excited about the progress we're making.
Well, and I'm delighted that you're here to share that. I am honored to have met many state legislators who I regard as statesmen, not necessarily politicians. And the reason that I say it that way is because I don't recall even one, and we've had some on the other side of the aisle who were on this program, had so much fun with it. A black Democrat out of Georgia, for an example. And he says, you've got a perfect solution, referring to the Countermand Amendment. But at any rate, and another black man, Guillory, out of Louisiana, laughed our fool heads off. Now, I don't know if we're going to do that tonight. But we have enjoyed meeting these people, and I am really privileged to meet some of the really finest men in the country, and women for that matter. So, and you are going to rate among the best that we've had so far. But I have a couple of things that I think are important to share in light of what you just explained. John Overington, a delegate from West Virginia, who has attended your meetings on the two previous ones, has been on our show twice, and he's tried to keep us updated. And he supports what you're doing 100%. He also supports us, because personally I don't see any conflict between the two, and I'll explain that in a moment. But there is a perspective that we have been trying to present to legislators throughout the country, including to those who are part of the Legislative Assembly. And for those in the audience who don't know that, that is the new name, isn't it, Representative Kapanga, Legislative Assembly?
It's the Assembly of the State. Yeah, Assembly of State Legislatures, and the acronym is ASL.
Okay,
it's easy to remember.
The fact is that the work that you're doing, I believe, coincides with what we're doing, but with a little bit of a different perspective. And how for the sake of our audience and also for those who will be listening and I'm sure many state legislators will be listening to this program tonight, We work with probably 6,500 legislators around the country. But the perspective that we take is based on two factors. One, sovereignty in state legislatures, and I'll give some explanation of that in a moment. And two, delegates going to a convention are ambassadors of their legislatures, not free agents. With those two components, the convention, however it's called, for whatever purpose, the convention can be successful. Now, in 1787, and you have helped us in understanding some of the history back then, contrary to what many of the anti-Article 5 groups have been advocating, and some of the Article 5 groups who see history in a different way than I do, what they have done is they have missed the central reason and the central issue that the state legislatures had to deal with in 1787, and that was sovereignty. Before the Annapolis Convention, and that was before the Constitutional Convention, and even before the Articles of Confederation, which was just a short-lived document, the fact remains that nation-state status existed through the sovereign authority of state legislatures. And the biggest problem that you guys had, not you personally, but legislatures as a body and down through history, has been to retain that sovereignty so that we can retain our republic as an entity whereby independent states in a cooperative arrangement are working to create a functional federal government. Now, when the Annapolis meeting fell apart, and for the reasons you stated, there were just not enough participants, then the delegates who were sent, who we now see as the founders, went back to the Confederation Congress and inquired as to the possibility of re-examining the entire articles instead of just amending them, according to maybe commerce and one or two other smaller issues. They would look at the possibility of a whole new document. And because the Confederation Congress, along with the cooperation of the state legislatures at that time, had allowed the convention to be convened as an open convention, the point was there were no restrictions on it, the delegates were able to examine what they wanted with this further consent from Congress, and they did consent. And so now they went off trying to figure out how to solve the great problems at that time. We almost lost the Revolutionary War because of one problem that the articles created, and that is the state legislatures, in order to amend the articles and to do certain things that deal with taxes and so forth, there had to be unanimous consent. And one state could hold the other 12 hostage, and that's what Rhode Island tried to do before the convention started. And so they had to solve that problem. But you see, the reason why the articles had that issue, that is unanimous consent, is because they wanted to retain their sovereign identity. They did not want to surrender their ability to govern themselves. And so as the convention the arrangements for the convention began to move forward, there was a very, very big problem that came at the very beginning of this constitutional convention. And that problem was, should there be one vote per state, or should it be based on population? And a fellow by the name of George Witt, who was one of the founders, or one of the delegates, with a committee that he put together, one of the tenets that he asked the delegates to agree to was that the states each would have one vote regardless of population. The larger states wanted population to be the governing factor. The smaller states, which there were more of them, said, no, let's have one state, one vote per state. That's what a republic is. We still have that debate today. The biggest issue that will happen at the Article 5 convention that we have today, which was totally different from the purposes of that convention, will be how to organize it. That's why we have a delegate resolution and a contract between the legislatures and their delegates, so we don't violate Article 1, Section 10, prohibiting compacts between the states. That delegate resolution simply says to the delegates, look, you will make certain, when 26 states have agreed to the delegate resolution, you will make certain that this convention will be conducted as a Republican form of convention under Article 4. And the reason for that is so that every state will have one vote. That was a critical issue. Now, I'm going to let you speak here for a moment because I could go on with some other things, but the point that I'm trying to address in this short period here is that sovereignty was the key. I see the state legislatures today being bombarded with a great many, that's not quite the right word, a great many ideas that deprive them of their sovereign deliberative status under Article 5. And I'm concerned about that. And I'm concerned because what is happening is the guys on the far right, the John Birches, the Constitution, they argue that you can only have a constitutional convention, an open convention. That's nonsense. The fact is that Article 5 is for proposing amendments. It's not for remaking the Constitution. And as long as the state legislatures honor that proposing amendment concept, they're within their parameters of doing what they want. They can also change that if they choose. You know, so the authority is in the legislatures. And right now, the biggest battle that we have in citizen initiatives is not to usurp your authority. We are not interested in exercising legislative authority. We want to defend that sovereign right that you have, that you will not surrender it. And for that reason, we advocate that you recognize that the legislatures created the federal government. The federal government didn't create the legislatures. And when the delegates had put Article 5 in the Constitution, they did it so that future legislatures, and that represents you, could modify the Constitution to pull back the encroachments or to push back the encroachment of the federal government, which they anticipated would happen, but the safety valve that they put in the Constitution was the state legislatures in Article 5.
That's right.
So all of a sudden, so you have the sovereign authority to say, hey, federal government, you went too far, and we're not going to put up with it. And that's why we have the Countermand Amendment, and I'll talk more about that when we have more time in a little bit. But you may feel free, Representative Campagna, to to respond to whatever I've said so far, or maybe something else that you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things that you said that really struck a key with us as we were doing our research, and that is, number one, the balance in federalism is so off right now, and essentially, as a citizen, I put my blame goes to the state legislators out there, and now that I'm a state legislator, I have to take that on as my own and say, okay, I can't sit here and point fingers anymore, so I have a responsibility to stop the federal government from significantly overreaching. And any state legislator out there who has ever dealt with the state budget, I'll just use that as one example. As we go through our state budget, as we try to change things or reduce spending, every time we hit something, it's tied to a federal program, and that federal program does not allow us as the state to change or reduce, or they can pull the entire program. And you can see how this happened, because slowly but surely, the federal government just put all these strings, and now we as states have made ourselves dependent and beholden to the federal government financially, because we have been, we spend like drunken sailors. No offense to the sailors out there, but we have got to figure out.
Now wait a minute. You're right, by the way, and I was a sailor, so be careful.
You can relate to that one.
Yes, I can.
That's not fair, because when the drunken sailor runs out of money, he stops spending money.
That's true.
That's right. He's
out.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's a huge problem out there, and it's not just in our budget. We were looking at, for instance, in the Labor Committee, we were looking at unemployment insurance reform and how we have to change the system because it's so broken. And as we looked at how do we change our state laws, we kept running into federal roadblocks, so we couldn't even change our own state laws because of it. It's just, as the longer you're in this and the more knowledge you gain from a state perspective, the more, Charles, you recognize that the point you made is absolutely true. We have advocated our rights to the federal government as state legislatures, and we've got to step up now, and we've got to take those back. And I think that's why you're seeing this movement out there, from the right and from the left, saying there is a problem in Washington. The federal government is out of control, and everyone agrees on it. The problem is not everybody agrees on, okay, what is the amendment going to say? So that's why we said the first step we have to take is let's get everybody in the same room so we can learn how to work together again, because it's only been a couple of hundred years since we've done this. Maybe it's good to take the issues off the table, and again, this is from the Assembly of State Legislatures perspective. This is how we're approaching it. let's focus on the process and not issues so that we can first learn to work together again. And as the conversations take place and we agree on how the process should run, what we see is we're starting to talk about issues, say, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? How could we meld these things together so that we can address the grievances or the issues that the states have here? So that's what's happening. And really, from my perspective, we're staying away from issues or amendment issues right now in our proceedings because we've got to stay focused on the process so we get those relationships in place and we learn how to work together and build some trust.
Understood.
Between the states.
And I think tonight we'll be talking about ideas that may help you. But we have to go to a station break right now and to hear from our sponsors. And so I'm going to just read a short portion here that is important for our listeners. The State Legislators Roundtable can be heard on Tuesdays at 9 p.m. and Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on CPRWorldwideMedia.com. Learn more about the Countermand Amendment. Go to countermands.us. You can also order an autographed copy of my new book, Countermand Amendment, to find the missing piece in the Article 5 puzzle. We have to take a short break for station identification and to hear from our CPR sponsors. We will be back shortly. Please stay with us. There is much more to come.
This is CPR Media Network, coming to you live from the USA.
How are things with the new guy?
All we do is go out to dinner.
That's it?
I mean, he picks up the tab every time, which is great.
Why? He's using you. He probably has a city thank you card and he gets 2 times the points at restaurants.
So he's just racking up points with me.
Some people.
Ugh.
No, I got it.
The City Thank You Preferred Card. Now earn 2 times the points on dining out and entertainment with no annual fee. To apply, go to city.com/thankyoucards.
The design of the Ford Escape is clearly intended to grab your eye. Oh, and your foot. Huh, ain't that a kick? The Ford Escape with the foot-activated liftgate. Go open up something interesting. Go further.
You think you know the story of Dracula? You have no idea. But I'm going to show you.
My enemies threaten to destroy my kingdom. I want the power to save my family.
Dreams.
Welcome to your life.
My name is Dracula.
What's happening to you?
I chose this. Because men do not fear swords. They fear monsters.
This is not who you are.
There's always a prize for power.
Everybody wants to rule.
I will not be defeated!
Dracula Untold, in theaters and IMAX, October 10th. The Ouija board has existed for centuries. It is used to communicate with the dead.
If there's a presence here, please make yourself known. This is a joke. Oh my god. It's not even real, okay?
It's just a Ouija.
We're saying goodbye!
Rated PG-13.
Read something recently worth thinking about. It's the soldier, not the campus organizer, who's given us freedom to demonstrate. It's the soldier, not the reporter, who's given us freedom of the press. It's the soldier, not the poet, who's given us freedom of speech. It's the soldier who serves under the flag, who defends the protesters' right to burn the flag. Isn't it time now to demonstrate that we support our troops? Were it not for the brave, there'd be no land of the free.
Fred Thompson's message was brought to you by CitizensUnited.org.
Welcome back, folks, to the State Legislators Roundtable. This again is Charles Kacprowicz. I am the Executive Director for Citizen Initiatives and the Countermand Amendment. On our panel tonight is Mike Coons, our National Director, Sandy Toth, our Executive Coordinator, and Kelly Gordon, our Producer, and also our National Coordinator. Our special guest tonight is Representative Chris Kopanga from Wisconsin. He's a distinguished leader in the legislature of Wisconsin, but he is also participating and leading in the Mount Vernon Assembly efforts on the part of many, many legislators across the country. And we've been having a good conversation. We got started a little late tonight, but we've been discussing many important things, and we're going to go back into our conversation right now with Representative Kapanga. Now, Representative Kapanga, as we were talking earlier, we were discussing sovereignty, and you were confirming the importance of sovereignty. And I am convinced that the nation will not restore its constitutional republic without sovereignty being retained by state legislatures. I am absolutely convinced of that. And when I think of sovereignty, it's not a matter of being able to do something with somebody else's permission, which is what many of the Article 5 groups are talking about today. And the anti-Article 5 groups emphasize that as well. For an example, if I'm an executive for a large corporation, I'm the CEO, and I've got an important project that I'm about to assign to my senior executive VP, I call him into my office and I say, sir, I have such and such a project and I want you to work on it and complete it within 6 months. These are the steps and I'd like you to go forward with it. And then he looks at me and he says, just a minute, I'm not sure that I want to do that. And I'm going to say, what did you say? And he's going to respond maybe with, well, I don't know that I approve of what you have in mind. Now, I would not object if he had an opinion, and I would consider that opinion. But if he comes at me as the boss, what am I going to do? I am sovereign. My sovereignty tells me I can fire this guy. I don't have to ask him for permission to fire him. And so I do fire him. He's gone. That's really sovereignty. Now, there's monarchical sovereignty, there's other kinds of sovereignty, but that's an example of the kind of sovereignty that state legislators have over the delegates who go to a convention. The biggest error that I see in the Article 5 proponents regarding delegates is that they see the delegates as equivalent to the founders. I totally disagree with that. Why? Because the founders, their purpose and their mission was to create a new document. We almost lost the Revolutionary War because the Articles of Confederation were inadequate to cover the needs of the fledgling nation. And then we almost lost the Revolutionary War after it was over, and we won simply because the economy was collapsing and the states couldn't agree on anything, even in the area of taxation and commerce. So the idea that I am trying to address here is that when you are sovereign, you don't need permission from anybody to do what you have to do. And when you send delegates under Article 5, they are not equivalent to the founders. They are, in fact, commissioned by the legislature. That's what the Delegate Resolution that we have is. It's a contract between the delegates and the legislature, which tells them what to do. Remember, the single purpose in Article 5 is to propose amendments. And that means that the delegates don't necessarily have to create the document that you're going to be approving and ratifying. That can be done by the legislatures as the deliberative body, which is what we advocate. So, in balance, I'm going to draw this part of my presentation to this conclusion, and then invite you to comment. There are 3 documents that we have with the Countermand Amendment. This strategy can be used in multiple applications on Congress for different amendments, as long as the legislatures pre-approve them. And the first one is the application itself, which is sent to Congress for the purpose of directing Congress to convene the convention. Now, it's an application until 34 states complete their applications. Then it becomes a mandate. But there is, and that means it's an order. Congress convened the convention. And in our application, we're telling Congress, look, get this thing done within 60 days of the 34th application. Otherwise, the states will convene the convention. Why? Because they will have met their constitutional requirements. But the states in their application don't need the permission of Congress to convene the convention. They just need to tell Congress that when the application is completed with 34 states, Congress, you have to convene this convention. Now, Congress does have a problem. They do have to protect the Constitution. And so, therefore, if the states offered these 34 applications had 10 different subject matters, that would not necessarily fall into the parameters of proposing amendments. and they wouldn't have 34 applications that would be for one amendment or one and multiple amendments all the same. So Congress could, and I think they have some prerogative here, say to the states, look, you haven't had any consistency. There's ambiguity as to what you want us to do. We're willing to convene the convention, but you need to tell us what the purpose is because it's for proposing amendments. And so, given that limitation, which can be solved quite easily with the 34 states having the same application, they're all not different. They're all the same application with the same wording. Now, Congress really has no ambiguity. They have to convene the convention. The second part of this is the amendment itself, in our case, the Countermand Amendment, but you could have the Balanced Budget Amendment. You could have the Term Limits Amendment, reining in government, and some other aspects. The fact is that that amendment, having been pre-approved by the state legislatures, is then inserted inside the Delegate Resolution, which then binds the delegates at the convention as ambassadors, not free agents. So now they're told exactly how to organize the convention, which is what our Delegate Resolution does. They're telling them that it has to be a Republican form of convention, one vote per state. No issue here, because if you get 26 states agreeing to a Delegate Resolution, then they will control the outcome of the convention. There's no forcing it down the states' throats. They would have all agreed to it independent and collectively at the same time. And then they will all at the convention have a vote to say, no, we don't want this amendment, because all 50 states will be invited. But the point that I'm making is you can control the conduct of the convention through a Delegate Resolution, determine how the voting will take place, and how the decisions will be made with 51% of the states voting. If that's not done, and I think this is one of the biggest problems that you and your team have with trying to look at ways to use Article 5, if that's not done, you will have 50 delegates from California going to the convention. That it could be 50 if that's how many Congress decides to summon, and I think they will. It will be based on the number of representatives in Congress. And then there will also be one from Wyoming. Wow, what's that going to do with the convention? That's going to create nothing but an imbalance, and who's going to win? California will always win. Wyoming will be left out. That's why it has to be predetermined before you even go to a convention as to what you require your delegates to do. That's why George Wythe, before the deliberations at the Constitutional Convention started, that's why he proposed in his committee that voting be by one vote per state for the purpose of having roll calls or voting at the convention. So we have the same problem today, but the Delegate Resolution solves that. Now, before I discuss any other aspect of the Countermand Amendment, I did want to ask you to make any comments that you'd like to make and add to it or to, criticize it if you want. But that's the perspective that we have.
Sure. Well, let's just talk about Congress's role, because obviously in the Assembly of State Legislatures, that is a huge discussion point on, there are arguments all over the place about what their role can and cannot be in the state option under Article 5. And again, as we go back to the Constitution and the secondary documents behind it, which are Federalist Papers, the notes to the Constitutional Convention, we see very clearly that Congress's role, again, let's just go to Federalist 85, where Hamilton says, the words of this article are peremptory. The Congress shall call a convention. Nothing in this particular is left to the discretion of that body. We are taking those words very literally, and we're saying if there is any point of discretion, it's clear that the founders said that is left up to the states. So here's how we're approaching that.
I agree.
We're creating what we're calling a document of notification, and let's put this in the shape of a birthday party that's going to happen for the sake of fun. We are going to lay out in our document of notification all of the details: the when, the where, the how, the what, and we're going to back it all up with the resolutions that have been passed in each state, or the applications. But this document of notification has to lay out all the details, because again, if there's anything of discretion left to Congress, number one, they can use it as a stalling tactic. Number two, they can just say, well, that's not defined, so we really don't know what to do here. And they can sit back and let the whole thing crash and not do anything. So we see it as very clear. Their job is to send that invitation out, and it's our job as state legislatures to make sure that we define all of the details so there's nothing of discretion left for Congress except to say, looks like we have a convention that's going to happen. Here's all the details, and we're going to send the invitation to that convention. So that's what we're doing, because we realize it could throw, if we don't do this correctly, Congress could throw so many wrenches into it. And again, go back to what George Mason said in the notes to the Constitutional Convention. It would be improper to require the consent of the national legislature because they may abuse their power and refuse their consent on that very account. So we know it is a very dangerous point. So that's, as you can probably tell, gets me a little bit excited because we're having a ton of discussion around it.
Yes. Well, everything you said, we would say yes and rah-rah to. I mean, nothing about what you're proposing we would have disagreement with. There is one refining point, though, that I think is important. Your legislative assembly, once you nail down what those duties for the delegates will be, need to consider the single-issue amendment approach, where the legislatures then will have a pre-approved text for an amendment that goes to the convention with directions for their delegates to vote on that particular amendment. And the reason I say that is because you want to have a safe convention. If we're looking at the delegates going to the convention as equivalent to the founders, then probably what you want to do is create a new constitution, because that would be what they did, and the delegates going to an Article 5 convention won't have that prerogative. They only have the prerogative of voting on and or even deciding on a particular amendment. So their purpose is different. And Article 5 came after the fact. In other words, when the founders started to put the Constitution together, Article 5 was a way for them to solve sovereignty. So they took the unanimous vote consent or requirement in the Articles, changed it to 3/4 of the states ratifying so that they didn't have any gridlock. And they went, or at least they wouldn't have the same kind of gridlock, so that the legislatures have a way in which to coordinate with each other a ratification for a particular proposal that is at a convention, and therefore one state can't hold the other 12 hostage. So I would add that to your ideas, that the single issue amendment concept be a very serious approach to how a convention can be done safely and quickly. With the Delegate Resolution, Representative Kopenga, I believe that convention could conduct its affairs in 7 days. That's how fast it can be, because you are the deliberative body then. You see, if you assign it to them, they're going to think of themselves as having authority that the Constitution doesn't give them. The Constitution doesn't say delegates are sovereign, or that delegates can actually apply for a convention. That might be a way for you to have certain duties performed through delegates, but they ought not be doing their will. They have to do your will in order for that convention to reflect the will and the authority and sovereignty of the state legislatures. I am very, very concerned that we don't lose that simple truth. Go ahead, sir, and share as would be on your mind.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. Number one, as we have our discussions, there's two things that clearly came out related to this, and that is, we feel it's clearly laid out that the states are the ones who can say, here's who our delegates are going to be, here's how many we're going to send. We as a body, the convention body, we don't feel we have the authority to tell states what they can do, because again, it goes back to what you're saying. That state is sovereign. So we believe that the states are the ones who will define who their delegates are going to be, what their limitations are. The second thing is the Assembly of State Legislatures is very, very clear as we talk. Everybody's on the same page that we will draft something in the rules that says that we recognize each state's ability to control their delegates, and if they have a Delegate Limitation Act, and take Senator Long from Indiana, he drafted and ran through the legislature there into law. Now it is in their statutes, a Delegate Limitation Act, and we as a body are going to draft it or write into our rules very clearly. We recognize that when a convention is called, we will follow the rules that each of those states put in place for their delegates. So there's no question that these delegates, again, I'll use this word runaway that I think is completely inappropriate. But if these states put that in place, we will follow that. And there's other situations that we have to think about too. So what happens if Idaho is the only state that does not actually put a Delegate Limitation Act in place? They file the application, they send it to Congress, they're part of the convention, they show up, their delegates don't have a limitation. What we're doing is we're actually going to be drafting in those rules the limitations of scope that if a state does not specify it, we will have it in our rules what those limitations are. And it will very clearly state our authority only lies with what the subject matter of the application is. And that's it.
Okay.
Once you step outside of that, you lose it. You lose your authority.
I'm going to, in a few moments, I'm going to bring in Mike Coons. He's got a comment that he wants to make. But I think there's a point here that we need to, I don't want to say we disagree with. I want to say, though, that we need to refine. The idea is subject versus single issue amendment. The idea of having a subject as as explaining the marching orders for the delegates leaves the delegates in a position where they still have to decide what the amendment is to be. They have to write it at the convention. We're saying that the state legislatures, as a deliberative body, should write the amendment before it goes to the convention. Congress is now out of the picture because we now have the convention started. So we're now talking about procedures that the legislatures alone have to monitor. So take COS's proposal, the Convention of States, for those in the audience that don't know what I mean by COS. Convention of States has proposed the convening of a convention for the purpose of, they used to call it topics, and then they changed it to subjects. And but they have proposed a convention that would be for three purposes on the basis of a subject. One of which would be reigning in government, the other would be term limits, and the other would be in some form of balancing the budget and giving control over monetary policy with the federal government. Now, that all sounds good, but what they would require is that delegates who go to the convention, that's all of those 534 politically charged delegates, would have to go and would have to, even though the subjects have been defined, even though the parameters of their performance and conduct at the convention would have to be detailed in their agreements, they still don't have the amendments done. So as a result, they would have to tackle these 534 politically charged delegates. They would have to tackle what is reigning in government. What does that mean? Where do we go? So I can envision not a new constitution being created, as some have foolishly argued, not that there will be an open convention, but I can see maybe mayhem in the sense that the delegates who go would be, as the parties today do, fighting with one another, and the ones who have the most delegates would wind up winning. Now, if you can get the 50 states to agree that it won't be by population, we might be able to make a little bit of headway there, but we still have the problem of defining what it means to reign in government. So my concern is that those delegates would first have to decide what the problem is. Two, they would have to decide how to define the problem so they can find the solution. Then they would have to decide how to address it in an amendment. Now, you could have under one reigning in government subject 12 subsubjects or 20 subsubjects. They would have to address each one of them. Then you could also have under that 12 or 15 under each subsubject. And then they'd have to do the same for term limits, or they would have to do the same for monetary policy and budgetary controls. But the point that I'm trying to make is that by doing it that way, the way COS is proposing, the delegates are free agents. They're given a sovereign authority that the Constitution doesn't give them. And because most of our scholars today, and I know them, many of them myself quite well, including those in the COS, had many conversations with them, because they rely heavily on convention experience in the past, which was basically the Constitution Convention and some that happened before then, between the states. They also rely heavily on legal precedent, including Supreme Court precedents and decisions, historical precedent. Certainly history is a big factor for them because they'll use this quote and that quote and so forth. And so what they're doing is they are defining what you guys have in sovereign authority based on what they think history tells them. We don't want to do that. If the state legislatures in 1787 left you sovereign authority, which I believe they did, then you define what that sovereign authority is, and you decide how to use it, and you don't have to worry about what happened before. You can use it as kind of a pointer. What did Madison say about reining in the authority of the federal government? How was he explaining the need for the states controlling the federal government? He did that in a number of places. That information is good, but the ultimate decision maker is the state legislatures under Article 5 for the purpose of proposing amendments as sovereign legislatures. If we come to that understanding, and I think you're there, except for this idea of subject, then what happens is we can have a safe convention. We can have a quick convention. And then the legislatures can actually be proposing multiple conventions. We could have one convention for the Countermand Amendment, which I would like to talk about in the next segment. But the fact is, that would be just one amendment. They could have another one for the Balanced Budget Amendment, which we have our own Balanced Budget Amendment. But we also support the one that is being proposed by Balanced Budget Amendment Task Force. And then we could have another one for the term limits. And there's a whole host of issues that can be addressed. But the state legislatures, with the three documents that I just told you about, the application, the text for the amendment pre-approved, and the delegate resolution, they could have a number of different conventions going forward at the same time. There's nothing in the Constitution that says you can't do that. Because if you're looking at these conventions under Article 5 for the purpose of proposing amendments, then it's not one and no more. It's not for the purpose of making a new Constitution. It's for the purpose of resolving issues that the federal government refuses to remedy that are a serious problem for the citizens of the states. Okay. Representative Kopanga, I'd like you to make some comments. We have a few minutes. And then after the break, we're going to ask Mike Kuntz to come in and share what's on his mind.
Sure. Well, let's just talk about the ability for 38 states to actually, again, we can have 34, but at the end of the day, we need 38 states to ratify this. Remember, the only power this convention has is to propose. It is not a ratification of anything. The states still have to ratify that and think through what hurdle that is. We've got 99 independent legislative bodies that will be looking at it. And this is outside of the convention, whatever comes out of the convention. So you've got to have 75, 76 of these independent legislative bodies look at the final product and say, yes, this is the will of the people, and I'll ratify that. So that's a very important thing that I always bring this back to as we start getting into, well, what should we walk in with an amendment language? Should we be our deliberative body, which is what I think the founders intended? And if you look at the convention in 1787, these guys deliberated a lot, but they redrafted the whole Constitution. Obviously, we don't have that much deliberation to do, but we still are. The convention is a deliberative body. So how do you define that? And that's where it starts getting sticky. Now, the conceptually, I agree with you. It would be amazing to walk in there with a pre-drafted amendment that 38 states, which means 76 independent legislative bodies have said this is exactly what it's going to say. Now, we also have to deal with the reality of that happening.
Representative, we're going to get a break right now.
Go ahead.
Just hold on tight and don't go away. We'll go into the next segment. Folks, we're going to take a station break and give our CPR sponsors a chance to share what they have for us also. So stay tuned, and we'll be back in just a few minutes. Thank you.
This is a station identification moment. You're listening to CPR Worldwide Media, a division of CPR Media Network, coming to you live right across the planet.
When I'm training, I always listen to music. For the gym, it's hip-hop. For cross-country, classical. And for jumps, I need something special. So I use my Citi Thank You Visa card for music downloads and earn 2 times the points. Plus, a little extra inspiration.
Excuse me while I kiss this guy.
The Citi Thank You Preferred Visa card. Earn 2 times the points on entertainment and dining out with no annual fee. Citi, with you every step of the way.
It's not about how many miles you can get out of the C-Max Hybrid. It's about how much life you can fit into it. The Ford C-Max Hybrid, with an EPA estimated range of 540 miles on a tank of gas, and all the room you need to enjoy the trip. Go stretch out. Go further.
You think you know the story of Dracula? You have no idea. But I'm going to show you.
My enemies threaten to destroy my kingdom. I want the power to save my family.
Drink.
Welcome to your life.
My name is Dracula.
What's happening to you?
I chose this. Because men do not fear swords. They fear monsters.
This is not who you are.
There's always a prize for power.
Everybody wants to rule.
I will not be defeated!
Dracula Untold, in theaters and IMAX October 10th. The Ouija board has existed for centuries. It is used to communicate with the dead.
If there's a presence here, please make yourself known. This is a joke. Oh my god. It's not even real, okay?
Ouija.
We're saying goodbye!
Rated PG-13.
Read something recently worth thinking about. It's the soldier, not the campus organizer, who's given us freedom to demonstrate. It's the soldier, not the reporter, who's given us freedom of the press. It's the soldier, not the poet, who's given us freedom of speech. It's the soldier who serves under the flag, who defends the protesters' right to burn the flag. Isn't it time now to demonstrate that we support our troops? Were it not for the brave, there'd be no land of the free.
Fred Thompson's message was brought to you by CitizensUnited.org.
Thank you, folks. We welcome you back
This
to the
is
State
CPR
Legislators Roundtable with
coming
an
to you
honorable
live from
state
the USA.
representative from Wisconsin, Mr. Chris Opanga. We've been having a very interesting discussion on Article 5, how it can and should be used, how the Mount Vernon group has been working to make the Article 5 process usable for the state legislatures, and we've been discussing that. Now, I'm going to ask Representative Opanga to finish his thoughts from the previous hour, I should say segment, and then I'll have Mike Coons come in and add some thought to it. Go ahead, Representative Opanga.
Yeah, I'll just make it real quick to wrap up my thoughts on subject versus an actual amendment, and just the practical execution of coming up with 38 identical amendment languages is tough because, again, you've got the sovereignty of the states you have to deal with. So something that we're kind of grappling with is we have to balance coming in and getting 38 sovereign states to say identical things versus we come in and we say this is what we're going to deal with. And this deliberative body that is supposed to be created that the founders said, you have the authority to propose. We've got to somehow balance that because the reality that we're seeing right now is it's going to be very hard to have a state like Rhode Island agree with the exact same words as someone from Texas. So we internally are dealing with that reality and trying to figure out how do we move forward as states so that we make progress because we want to keep this thing moving forward. So that's just a real quick comment. I know Mike wants to make some comments here too, so I want to give him the time.
Mike, let me just add one quick thing to what he just said. When you're talking about the different interests that the states have and how they would have difficulty in analyzing and agreeing on a particular amendment, the deliberative body status is the key. And that, there have been many legislators who have had input into our Countermand Amendment and also our Sovereignty Amendment. And our Balanced Budget Amendment, not so much, but we do have some legislative input there. So the point is that the legislators are already the deliberative body in deciding what these amendments are. And we are forming right now a national strategy committee composed of legislators and citizens, including the steering committee, the purpose for which is to prioritize issues that are troublesome to the states, and then deciding which ones should or shouldn't be countermanded. And I'd like to talk a little more about that in a few minutes after Mike comes in here and shares. Mike, go ahead and share what you have in mind.
Yeah, couple of things. When you were talking about this documentation of notification, big question is that the same thing as the application? Is that what you guys are looking at that as?
No, it's actually separate. Really what it is that what we want is we want something very clear that lays out, here's the states that have given their applications, here's what we consider to be qualifying application for this amendment, whether it's subject matter or whether it's actual amendment language. But it's really kind of a summary document that the Assembly of State Legislatures is putting together for the convention, it's actually, we feel we'll probably end up being the ones to deliver that to Congress, because what we don't want to do, Mike, is we don't want to leave it in the hands of Congress to say, well, let's count the applications here, and because they're not doing it.
Right.
We need some kind of a method or process in place so that something is from the states is delivered to Congress saying, here's all the details of the party. These are the applications that are behind this. Again, the authority comes from the applications. The document of notification really is just to make sure that it's very clear why we as state legislatures are bringing this set of applications to Congress, and we are saying under Article 5 authority, this qualifies for a call.
So, can I get a quick clarification? Then I got to move on to a second subject. And that is because right now we have the states making an application. So, are you getting the same application as well as Congress? That because Congress has to put that in the directory, the registry. So, are you getting the same applications being sent to you, and then you're taking that to Congress and saying, "Hey guys, here's 34 states that made application. Now you're gonna have to roll with this." Is that right. kind of it in a nutshell?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a copy of the resolution that we actually get from the state.
Okay. Now the other thing is this pre-approved versus done at the convention.
Mm-hmm.
And what I see that is that we've got a period of time that it's going to take for these states to make the 34 applications. So it could be, we think that we could end up having the 34 applications by the end of this coming 2015 session, if not early 2016 session. So during that time frame, wouldn't it be better to, at the same, the way we're working this thing is you got the application, and then our very next piece of legislation that we're bringing forward is the Delegate Resolution with the Countermand Amendment language put in it. So then that way, while we're getting these 34 applications done, you at the state level are, in essence, writing that amendment that you guys are going along with. And with our communications today, although you kind of talked about how that we've been unconnected over the years, over the last couple of 100 years, but our communications has really, is so much better that you guys are talking to each other. And so when so everybody's doing the same, on the same sheet of music, everybody's coming out, what we would like to see is like our Countermand Amendment. You take that, and the state of Alaska says, okay, we're going to have a delegate resolution that binds these delegates, and this is how the delegate convention is going to be run. And then here's the convention, here's the amendment. Now, when you're kind of talking about, well, maybe Rhode Island's not going to maybe Rhode Island's going to want something different. Okay, so Rhode Island comes in, and they don't have an amendment, but they come in and they see what that is being put forward, all you really need, they can either vote yes or no, because if we have 26 states, because it's not 34, it's not even really 38 at the convention that we really have to worry about. What we really have to worry about is getting 26 states or more, which is 51%, because this is going to be an Article 4, Section 4 convention where all states have equal standing. So all we need is really that 26 state to say, this Countermand Amendment or this Balanced Budget Amendment or this Sovereignty Amendment or this repeal of the 17th Amendment has already been pre-done over those last 6 months by 26 or more states. Those state delegates then, when they go to the convention, are bound by their state legislature to vote for that amendment. So now you have those 26 states or more now have passed it. Then that amendment goes to Congress. Congress sends it out for the 38 states. Here's the last point I want to make, and that is, if during that time frame we have 26, 34 states that all have written the same identical amendment, let's say the Countermand Amendment, which is our puppy, then when that goes out for ratification, we can pick up the 4 real easy, because even the 4 moderate states, even the 4 states that well, we're not really so sure about that, but when they look at the unfunded mandates, when they look at land grabs, when they look at EPA, when they look at, gun control, when they look at all these other areas that may have a really large impact on them, and see what this Countermand Amendment can do, they're going to go, yeah, and now you got your 38. So that's just my thoughts.
Yeah, I guess my response to that is this. Obviously, if we could do it that way, I agree with you. Whether it's the Countermand Amendment, Balanced Budget Amendment, the left is pushing the Campaign Finance Amendment. There's all these different amendments. If we can get those laid out, and we can get 34 states in their applications to lay it out, great. But let's say we get let's go to your vote of 26 states. We have 26 states vote out of the convention. Here's what we think the amendment language should be. Number one, who says that 26 states is okay? The convention body actually can say, well, and this is something we're talking about right now with ASL, why is it 26 versus 34 versus 38? The convention actually, as the deliberative body or the body with the authority here, they're the ones who are going to say it. Let's pretend it's 26 though. Let's say we'll go with simple majority. The problem you have is the reality of how these sovereign states think. So let's say there's 26 states that vote out the amendment language from the convention. Congress passes it to the states for ratification. If you have 14 states from the convention that have voted against that, the reality is just again, after being in this, or I'm just got done with my second term, I can see already that the sovereignty of states gives these states a very independent flair when they're on their own, which is kind of strange because they don't give that flair when it's the federal government. But you'll see this independence and that sovereignty flare up. If they voted against it out of the convention, it's going to be very difficult to get them to vote for it and go back to their legislatures and say, well, we voted against it at the convention, but now I want you guys to vote for it as a legislature. So that's the problem that we run into. That's just the reality we have to deal with. So that's my response to my concerns with that thought process. And I'm not saying it's not doable, but
let me interject this.
Okay.
The fact that the convention may have only 26 states that have agreed on a specific amendment, and then it goes back to the states for ratification and it's rejected. It only took a week at the convention to get it approved, to get out of the convention back to the states. So the point is, nothing is lost. It's still a Republican form of government. And that each state can reject it in its ratification vote is very clear. So they haven't lost any sovereignty. They just weren't part of the 26. Now, I personally believe, as we will in a few minutes talk about the details of the Countermand, But I personally believe it's going to be a lot more than 26 states. I wouldn't be surprised if there weren't 38 or more states, because this is a nonpartisan amendment that appeals to the sovereignty of all states. But the point that I'm making is the process of Article 5 allows the deliberative sovereign status to be retained by the legislatures in deciding what the delegates are to do, and with a pre-approved text that they decide is approved. And then the democratic process at the convention, through one vote per state, continues, and then eventually the democratic process in the republic, requiring 38 states to ratify, is the final arbiter, the final decider. So there's nothing in that these steps in this process that denies any state its right to reject ratification. But what it will do is it will give each state an opportunity to see things moving quicker if you have this delegate resolution and a pre-approved text in place. And then,
Charles,
go ahead.
Really, just a quick interjection too, is that the states may not decide to vote one way or the other on ratification, and there is no time limit. As long as there's not a time limit put on this by the process, which was the only one that's been put a time limit that I know of was the Equal Rights Amendment. As long as you don't put a time limit on it, this thing could go on. As the state legislatures change into their dynamics, a state that wasn't willing to vote for this yet could end up voting for it in 2 years. And I'll leave it at that.
Yes. Now, I would like to invite Sandy Tothich. Are you on the call right now, Sandy?
Yes, I am.
Please share the things that you would like to share. I know that you've got a few things you want to talk to the Representative Capenga about, as well as the audience.
Well, what I've looked at is, because I've been following all the horrible things that have been going on in the country, and I feel like we're running out of time to do something to stop it, to change it. We have an absolute ton of things. We're losing jobs because of Obamacare. We're losing jobs because of EPA regulations. The economy is not doing well. Our military is getting messed up. I mean, I could just go on and on. Even Dodd-Frank is still messing up our banking system. So I'm looking at this as time constraint, that we need to get moving and get something done in the quickest way possible. As long as we can do something that's safe and can get done. And I look at what we're doing as probably the quickest way, because we perhaps could accomplish something within 2 years. And then states could start countermanding and stopping some of this. Because if the legislatures are pre-approving the amendment, and I have found very few legislators, when they understand the power of the countermand and what it can do, there's nothing else that any other group has proposed, or anyone else I've heard of in this country, that's proposed anything to deal with the current problems. A balanced budget amendment, yes, we need it, but that's not going to solve Obamacare, or the EPA regulations, or federal land grabs, as so many of the western states, have problems with.
That's true, Sandy. The Countermand is a brilliant piece of legislation. It's fewer than 400 words, and it addresses so many of the problems that we face. Man, if the state legislatures get this power of the Countermand, and 30 states can rein in the federal government. No, we don't want Obamacare. No, you can't have our guns. No, you can't take our lands. The federal land grabs are insane. The Constitution says they can only have 1 to 2% of each state. And how much of Alaska do they have, Mike? 67% and 80, 90 of Nevada? It's insane. That Countermand is brilliant.
You have 67% of Alaska, 67% of Utah, 91% of Nevada. I can go right on down the list.
I do. I believe in that Countermand, heart and soul. I mean, I know that the hand of God is on this piece of legislation.
Well,
I truly believe that Charles has discovered the missing piece to that Article 5 puzzle, and that is that delegate resolution. All of it pre-approved waiting at the table before the delegates ever sit down. That's going to save a lot of arguments right there. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm done.
Okay.
Go ahead, Sandy.
Anyway, starting with the fact that, first of all, when we were all, and there were a lot of people that contributed to this across the country, so it's a We the People amendment. We're looking for something that could immediately start handling the current problems. I've never heard of anyone, the balanced budget, yes, fine. Term limits, fine. But those can be left till we get the federal government under control. And right now, there's no other way. I'm sorry. I know all those other things are great, but if you can't do something to stop all those executive orders, what happens if our president does go through with all of these aliens now becoming great and wonderful and getting into having the right to be here, no problem, let's let them all stay. Everybody is having fits about this. That's never mind, that's going to even make the job situation worse than it is. Because we will lose more. If he does this, there's going to be another big rush of illegals crossing the border. And that's going to kill jobs even more. Look at Obamacare with the 30-hour work week, how it's killed jobs. Unless we get lucky and we get a very conservative Republican president at the next election go around and the present majorities are maintained in the House and Senate, we really don't have a chance of repealing Obamacare. The only way we're going to get rid of it is through the countermand. I'm firmly convinced of that.
Sandy, I'm going to interrupt you because I was just told that we're running out of time. I want to, because I only have a few minutes to close. Representative Kopenga, I want to read two sections in this countermand. Suggesting that you need to endorse this because you're in a position where you have to balance things in ways that makes it difficult for you to know which way to go. But the audience that's listening tonight, I want them to hear what this countermand is doing. Section 1. The article restores state sovereignty in our constitutional republic by providing state legislatures countermand authority. Section 2. State legislatures in the several states shall have the authority to countermand and rescind any congressional statute, judicial decision, executive order, treaty, government agency's regulatory ruling, or any other government or non-government mandate, including excessive spending and credit, imposed on them, and in the opinion of 60% of state legislatures, the law or ruling adversely affects their state's interest. When the countermand threshold has been reached, the law or ruling shall be immediately and automatically nullified and repealed. This countermand authority shall also apply to existing laws and rulings. The other aspect of this that's very important, we only have 5 minutes now, is this, that when the federal government will not prosecute intentional violators of the provisions of this amendment, denying the states the right to exercise their prerogatives in this amendment, then individual states, after 90 days, can prosecute under state laws. That puts them on notice, and it says to them, be careful, because you could get yourself in trouble if you start to play hanky without political rights. So I wanted to bring that to your attention. Once the countermand initiatives start, then you guys are completely in charge. You're saying, hey, we want to pull back on some of the land grabs by the federal government, and you select certain laws and rulings that are forcing that type of imposition down your throats, and all of a sudden you can rescind them with 30 states. And you select what it is that needs to be addressed, as Sandy was saying just a little while ago. Now, Representative Kopenga, you have been an excellent guest. Unfortunately, even with the delay and your willingness to stay with us for the full 2 hours, we are now at the end of our show. And we are going to have to close here in a few minutes. But I would like, and I also have the custom of closing our show with a short prayer. So I would like to give you the next minute or so just to make some final comments, and then I will come in with a concluding comments.
Sure. Well, obviously, thank you guys for the passion you have for state sovereignty in this nation, and thank you for having me on. I think there's a very common point out there, no matter where you are on the political spectrum, and that gives us hope at the Assembly of State Legislatures, and I think it's something that you guys can grab onto too. That is, all sides agree the federal government has too much power. And this is nothing new. Look back at Madison's Bill of Rights. Why did he bring forward the Bill of Rights? To limit the power of Congress. We have to step forward and do something about it. The Assembly of State Legislatures is trying to lay the groundwork for whatever amendment the people of the United States want to bring forward. So that's what we're about. I appreciate you guys having me on and letting me talk about it. It's been a great discussion. I love it.
Well, and you certainly would be welcome to come back on the show and discuss things further with us. We do have many listeners out there, many of which are in Wisconsin, and you will have an input in their lives as well with the reasons that you have shared. Folks, we're going to take a station break and give our CPR sponsors a chance to share what they have for us also. So stay tuned. We'll be back in just a few minutes.
You're listening to CPR Worldwide Media, a division of CPR Media Network, coming to you live right across the planet. Check out our website at www.cprworldwidemedia.com and our Facebook page at facebook.com/CPR Worldwide Media. This is CPR Media Network, coming to you live from the USA.
Well, looky here, a new listener. Hey, this ain't your little sister's radio station.
Over the next 40 years, the United States population is going to grow by over 90 million people, and almost all that growth is going to be in cities. What's the healthiest and best way for them to grow so that they really become cauldrons of prosperity and cities of opportunity? What we have found is that if that family is moved into safe, green, affordable housing, places that have access to great school systems, access to jobs, and multiple transportation modes, then the neighborhood begins to thrive and really, really take off. The oxygen of community redevelopment is financing. And all this rebuilding that happened could not have happened without organizations like Citi.
One of the things that we really try to do is to collaborate with people like Jonathan Rose, who are really like-minded and really can also provide innovative solutions to social issues.
And Citi has formed a partnership with our company so that we can take all the lessons from the revitalization of urban America to other cities. So we're now working in Chicago and in Washington, D.C., and Newark.
It's branching off of Jonathan's expertise and the fact that he has done so many wonderful affordable housing projects, new development and rehabilitation work. And so we were really seeing that there was a need for his skill in areas even outside of New York.
It's amazing how important safe, affordable housing is to the future of our society.
You meet new people, they want to know what you do. And when you tell them your job is to invest in things like low-income housing and schools and healthcare, they're shocked and they're so surprised that a job like this exists in finance. They always say that they had no idea, and then they want to know how they can get a job like that.
The design of the Ford Escape is clearly intended to grab your eye. Oh, and your foot. Huh, ain't that a kick? The Ford Escape with the foot-activated liftgate. Go open up something interesting. Go further.
Read something recently worth thinking about. It's the soldier, not the campus organizer, who's given us freedom to demonstrate. It's the soldier, not the reporter, who's given us freedom of the press. It's the soldier, not the poet, who's given us freedom of speech. It's the soldier who serves under the flag, who defends the protesters' right to burn the flag. Isn't it time now to demonstrate that we support our troops? Were it not for the brave, there'd be no land of the free.
Fred Thompson's message was brought to you by citizensunited.org.
Welcome to the State Legislators Roundtable, Your host will be Charles Kacprowicz, Executive Director of Citizen Initiatives and Countermand Amendment. Our special legislator guests will be discussing important issues in their states that relate to federal encroachment on states' rights. The nonpartisan Article 5 single-issue countermand amendment can remedy many states' issues peacefully without the consent of Congress, the courts, or the executive branch. We will reclaim our constitutional republic soon. The nonpartisan countermand amendment is the missing piece of the Article 5 puzzle. Our nation is coming apart at the seams, so we are countermanding.
Welcome back, folks, to the State Legislators Roundtable. This again is Charles Kacprowicz. I am the Executive Director for Citizen Initiatives and the Countermand Amendment. On our panel tonight is Mike Coons, our National Director, Sandy Toth, our Executive Coordinator, and Kelly Gordon, our Producer, and also our National Coordinator. Do you know what the 34, 26, 38, 51 strategy is? Have you ever heard of such a thing? Well, you're going to learn about it tonight. You're going to learn that through this strategy, we will reclaim this Constitution and this Republic. The roundtable discussions can center around critical issues in the states as they relate to federal encroachment on states' rights and how the Countermand Amendment can remedy them. This is not a gotcha format. We are not here to back someone into the corner. We want serious discussions of states' rights issues and how they can be remedied safely and quickly for the citizens of our states. Subjects can include taxation, criminal law, energy policies, health care, social issues, federal land grabs, court decisions, education, executive orders, unfunded liabilities, the EPA, the BLM, and much more. You will learn how to protect your enumerated rights in the First, Second, Fourth, and Fifth Amendments. Think about that. Have you ever thought about protecting those enumerated rights? Now, what about the unenumerated rights? Discussions may also center around how the states can identify, define, and protect their unenumerated rights in the Ninth and 10th Amendments, peacefully and permanently and without nullification. Now, before I begin my end of it, I want to introduce our panel. On our roundtable tonight, we have Kelly D. Gordon. She is our National Coordinator and Texas State Director. She will participate in the discussion as we go forward. We also have Sandy Toth. She is our Executive Coordinator and our Georgia State Director and has done a marvelous job in helping me advance this work over the last several years. And then we have our National Director, Mr. Mike Coons, in Alaska, and he is also our Alaska State Director. The Countermand Amendment is an amendment that will allow 60% of the states to countermand any law or ruling that the federal government has imposed on the states, and in the opinion of 60% of the states, which right now is 30 states, that law will be rescinded when 30 states countermand it because it's burdensome to their citizens, to their businesses and industries. This will be the first opportunity the states have had since the creation of our Constitution to be able to be looked upon by the federal government as a partner in government, not subjects to federal mandates. We're going to be talking about many things as the weeks go by, dealing with problems that the states have and how it is that they have lost the ability to apply and exercise their sovereign authority as state legislatures. Now, in the introduction, I would like to, Mike, did you have something that you wanted to add to this program at this point?
Not right now. It's just that there's a lot to this. We're going to be discussing how the state legislatures actually make this happen step by step, and then of course what Charles said about the countermand. And there's a lot to it, but it's also simple.
Thank you, Mike. Sandy, did you want to bring something into this conversation as we begin this program tonight?
To me, the Countermand Amendment is one of the most important things that we have going for us. so that we can restore our country and stop the federal government from running all over us. They've taken away so many of our rights and done so many things that are bad for individuals that it's unbelievable. And I'm just looking forward to the day when our amendment gets ratified.
Very good, Sandy. I know later on I'm going to ask you to talk about the reasonableness of the countermand, and we'll give you opportunity to share some of those ideas at that time. Kelly, would you like to add something in the introduction here?
Absolutely. I am so thrilled with the possibilities that the countermand can do for us. I noticed that the Bundy Ranch is having problems again, and it seems that when states have problems with the federal government, they try to use their nullification, and it seems that the federal government just comes right back at them with a lawsuit. I don't see that happening with the countermand. If 30 states step up and countermand, especially those land grabs, which we all know that the Constitution only allows 1% to 2% of a state to be owned by the federal government, and that is only for needful things. They don't need to control our monuments, our land, our resources. Those are for the states. But somehow they've gotten a hold of, they think they own America. But if they, if 30 states step up and countermand and say, that's it, you are allowed 1% to 2%, no more. What is it that they think they own up in Alaska, Mike? 67%?
It's 67% of 563,000 square miles.
Yeah, so if we've got that countermand, then if the federal government wants to sue a state, I guess they're going to have to go after all 30 that countermanded it.
Thank you.
I'm excited about the countermand. And I think the state legislators are getting excited too.
I believe so. As a matter of fact, that leads into what I was about to say. We have presently 14 states that have sponsors for this amendment, representing perhaps 30 or more legislators, because many states have multiple, maybe even 40 legislators. We have made a lot of progress in the last few months. In total, we've had about 75 state legislators on our program, the State Legislators Roundtable. And we have had an excellent experience with just about every one of them. As the legislators have come on this State Legislators Roundtable, there is a term that I have come to use, which is called statesman. I would say that, and I can't think of anyone who isn't, that every single one of them are statesmen, trying to find solutions for their states and their citizens and their nation. And they are doing it without being political in the sense that they'll make a decision only if it's good for their party. They're not doing that. These guys are really, and these women are really trying to find solutions, and we're trying to help them. And we believe that the Countermand Amendment will, in fact, give them the tools that they need in order to reclaim this constitutional republic. We're going to talk a lot about that, especially with this 34, 26, 38, 51 strategy. You're going to say, what are those numbers? Well, they are meaningful numbers, and they will prove to you that we can win this battle. Now, the first problem that we have to deal with is a simple word called sovereignty. For whatever reason, there has been an onslaught of anti-Article 5 people and groups who have been bombarding the legislators with the idea that they do not have sovereignty under Article 5. They make statements like, well, you better make sure that Congress approves of your applications. Or they make statements like, you better make sure that the Supreme Court doesn't overrule your decision to call for a convention or to apply for a convention. They make statements like, well, Congress alone convenes the convention and calls the convention. You only apply for it. That's nuts. And let me tell you why it's nuts. You see, the Constitution says under Article 5 that when two-thirds of the states, which is 34, apply to Congress to convene a specific amendment, a convention rather, for the purpose of proposing amendments, that application has to be honored by Congress. It's not an option for Congress. Congress has no option but to decide to convene the convention. That 34th call, that 34th application, now makes the applications a mandate. They are no longer applications on Congress. They are orders to Congress, and Congress becomes the facilitator to address issues that the state legislatures want addressed at a convention, and then they are forced to convene the convention. Now, if they play politics, remember they're just a facilitator. They are not the ones who originate the authority or the sovereignty in order to convene the convention. If they play politics, then we have built into our application on Congress for the Countermand Amendment Convention the authority, the authorization for the states to convene the convention on their own, simply because they will have met their constitutional requirements. There will be nothing to hamper the work that they want to do at a convention. I'm going to say a lot more about this subject, especially sovereignty, and the reason why state legislatures are in control, but anyone want to add something to this topic so far?
Well, the 34th state threshold, if everyone will, this will prove to the U.S. Congress that we are actually united states. 34 of us are coming to them and saying, look, you guys aren't doing what we need you to do, so go sit down at the kiddie table and we'll take it from here. The states will take it.
Yes, very much so, and they would be within their constitutional rights to do just that. I want the audience to think of this question. If Article 5 was placed in the Constitution to solve a problem of state sovereignty, and it was for the purpose of allowing future legislatures to modify the Constitution by proposing amendments, and that any amendment to the Constitution is an order to the Congress and the courts and the executive branch and the regulatory agencies that tells them what they are required to follow, then why is it that some have been arguing that Congress has to give permission to the states before they can convene a convention? What nonsense is it to think that if the states are sovereign deliberative bodies and they can amend the Constitution, what in the world do you need Congress's permission to do that? The states are the ones who created the Constitution in the first place in 1781 when they ratified it. They're the ones that passed this authority down to future states. And but the fact is that we need to understand sovereign authority. We will be addressing sovereignty, and we will also be addressing deliberative body status in state legislatures. These are two very important concepts, and there is no other Article 5 group out there who is proposing it the way we have been proposing it. And I might add, we have had some long experience with this. I have been involved with amendments to the Constitution, either through Congress and or through state legislatures for 41 years, so I'm not new to this. And we do have some authority behind us and some knowledge that our people have brought to the table for the purpose of putting this package together. I find that we have difficulty today in thinking that anyone is sovereign, that somehow that in itself is a bad term. Well, folks, I would like to tell you that sovereignty is what keeps our Constitution solid. And the sovereign authority that can make it protected is the state legislature. Let me give you an example of sovereignty. If I am a CEO of a large corporation and I call my executive VP in and I assign to him a task that I give him 6 months to complete, I explain to him some of the details and what I expect. And then he looks at me indignantly and he said, I don't think it's a good idea. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to ask him, what do you mean it's not a good idea? And he's going to say, well, I just don't like the tone of it. What am I going to do? That guy's fired. I fired him. I have sovereign authority over him. That's because he works for me. He's obligated to follow my instructions, assuming that he gives me good advice, I will listen to that. But the moment that he gets belligerent and starts to act like he has that authority, he's out of there. Well, that's the same kind of sovereign authority that state legislators have with delegates who go to a convention. Now, there's a tremendous misinformation that has been passed on by other Article 5 groups dealing with delegates. Most of the Article 5 groups argue that delegates are equivalent, let me rephrase that delegates under the Article 5 are equivalent to founders in 1787. That is simply not true. That is simply not true. The delegates today, under Article 5, have an entirely different role than they did the delegates who were the founders in 1787. Entirely different. Their purpose is to vote on an amendment that's been proposed by the state legislatures for the purpose of amending the Constitution with a proposed amendment, not to create a new Constitution. Article 5 does not allow delegates at a convention to rewrite the Constitution, other than as the amendment is worded by the state legislatures in a very strict way. Now, if the state legislatures had decided to rewrite the Constitution in a way that would be more suitable to their intentions, they could not do it under Article 5. Here's how they would have to do it. They would have to secede from the Union. They then would have to convene their own convention, and at their convention, they would have to rewrite the Constitution and then put in a new government. The Article 5 part of our Constitution would not allow them to do that. So this idea that somehow an Article 5 convention is a risky thing because it will allow the delegates, of all people, to decide what should be done with our present Constitution. Do we want to get rid of the First Amendment? Do we want to get rid of the Fourth Amendment? Do we want to get rid of Article 1? Whatever it is, the point is delegates don't have that authority under Article 5, and the legislatures don't have that authority under Article 5. Now, they can amend the Constitution to change that if they choose, but if you are advancing a single-issue amendment for the purpose of protecting this constitutional republic, Article 5 is the vehicle that the state legislatures have. Now, let's talk about sovereignty for a minute. The nation-states in 1787 had serious problems on their hands. They just came through the Revolutionary War. They couldn't come up with even agreement between themselves as to how to fund the army, Washington's army. And they found themselves almost losing the Revolutionary War because any meaningful change, both to the Articles of Confederation and other aspects of what they would be doing to advance the revolution, would have to secure the approval of 13 states. That is, it had to be a unanimous consent. Why did they have that under the Articles? Because they wanted to retain their sovereignty. One state could hold the other 12 hostage. That's the reason. And because one state could say, we are not going to vote for this particular type of article, amendment to the Articles of Confederation, it would not happen. And the Articles would stay the way they are with unanimous vote. Now, when we look at it that way, we have to ask ourselves, what was the biggest issue at the convention? Well, here it is, folks. It was sovereignty. It was not about how to organize the convention. It was not about delegate authority. It was not about anything dealing with the Articles of Confederation from the standpoint of how to amend it. Remember, the Articles of Amendment with Madison and Hamilton, and I believe Tyler from Virginia, they went to the Congress of the Confederation and they asked for permission to convene a convention for the purpose of amending the Articles of Confederation. The state legislature said yes. But that convention was convened in such a way that it really was an open convention. There were no restrictions. But they got into that convention, and before the formal convening of the convention, they realized that they were deadlocked, and there was no way that they were going to amend the Articles by addressing issues such as commerce and funding the military and so forth. So they saw that the Articles of Confederation were not going to be amended by this particular convening of the convention by this Confederation Congress. So what happened? They went back to the Congress, which was a different Congress than today, and then they went back to their legislatures, and they told them that the only thing that they felt could be accomplished would be if they started to look at rewriting the whole Constitution. So that meant that the Articles were subject to the changes that could take place as a result of this convening of a new convention. Well, they got permission to do that. There was no usurpation of power. They had permission from Congress to do that. The problem was when they first went to the convention in Philadelphia and they decided to begin looking at how this convention should be convened, even before the first deliberations, guess what the issue was? It was sovereignty. The larger states with the most the greatest population, they were saying, we want all votes at the convention to be based on population of the states. The smallest states said, wait a minute, we are a republic. We don't want to give up our nation state status. We want one vote per state. This was a serious problem. And so this gentleman, who was a delegate by the name of George Witt, and he put a committee together, and they discussed this, and they reviewed it, and they decided, because there was more pressure from the smaller states that can be exerted than the bigger ones, they decided that the convention would have one vote per state. This meant that it was a Republican form of convention. That was even before it was convened in a formal sense for deliberations. And then when they went into the convention, how did they solve this sovereignty problem? It was still there. Remember, they were nation states before, and under the Articles, they had the right to hold the other 12 states hostage because everything required, for amending the Constitution, it required unanimous vote. So how did they solve it? They solved it in Article 5. Article 5 was the solution for preserving state legislature sovereignty. And as a result, they, knowing that they were deadlocked with the unanimous vote requirement, they agreed to amend it, that is, that unanimous vote requirement, to where it was only 3/4 to ratify the new Constitution that would be eventually ratified by the legislatures. So now they had a way in which the states could conduct the business of the republic, still give the federal government authority in order to carry on its legitimate role as a federal government for the protection of the states and the citizens, and at the same time not be held hostage by one state who could negate anything that the other 49 in our case states would want to advance. And so Article 5 is critical. Now, we, in our show, that is our roundtable show, we already have many, many legislators who are part of what we call the National Strategy Committee. This is a committee of legislators, citizens, and a steering committee. And the purpose is to simply help the state legislatures define what problems that multiple states have. Once they decide what those issues are, whereby there is federal encroachment on their states' rights, like for an example in Nevada. Guess what's happening in Nevada right now? Nevada, aside from what Kelly had just said earlier, is looking at a new problem developing with the BLM. The fact is 81% of the land in Nevada is controlled by the federal government. That's nuts. What rights do the citizens have to control their state? With that kind of a percentage, whether it be through EPA or BLM or congressional statutes or environmental laws or whatever it is, the states don't control their own land. And so that's the kind of problem that you have when the states abdicate their sovereign authority by not using it. But if they see themselves as sovereign deliberative bodies, as the legislators who have been part of our show over the last several months have been recognizing and acknowledging, what happens is now they decide the future course of America. That's where the second number comes in. 34 states are needed to apply it to Congress for the single-issue Countermand Amendment Convention. When the 34th state happens, all of a sudden it becomes an order, a mandate on Congress. They don't have an option. And then when 26 states agree or more, and I think there'll be 34 or more states agreeing on this delegate resolution, and I think that's one of the reasons why we're getting so much attention from so many different states right now. But the fact is, when 26 states pass this as a resolution and binding their delegates, that means that the convention is going to be a safe convention. Methodology is so not only essential, but already used by other organizations. There are church groups, the Southern Baptists happen to be one of them. And what they do is they have both state conventions and a national convention. And the leaders of the organization, the denomination, they decide the issues even before the convention is convened. Then they send that information out to the states, and they say, to the churches, and they say, okay, send delegates to decide whether or not we should adopt this as part of our bylaws. And so then the delegates from the different states and the different churches come and they meet. They don't go to that convention to decide what the issues are. They don't go to decide if that denomination should do such and such. They go for the single purpose of voting on what the leaders of that denomination have already decided. Well, that's the same reasoning and the same type of deliberative sovereign authority that the legislatures have. So now, if we get 26 state legislatures to approve this delegate resolution. It's a contract between the legislatures and their delegates, not between each state. So there's no Article 1 violation. There's no possibility that the Supreme Court could decide that somehow there's a violation of Article 1. That's not going to happen with the delegate resolution. Now, when we get to the voting, we have the 51. The 38 is necessary, which is 3/4 of the states to ratify. But the 51 is the magical number. You see, yes, we do need 34 applications. And we need to define that application in such a way so Congress will not see it as ambiguous. Now, Congress does have to protect the Constitution. On the other hand, if you have a single subject, a single amendment that is predefined and also pre-authorized, what you've got is a way to conduct a convention safely and quickly. I believe that with our delegate resolution, a convention could be convened within a week, not months, not years, within a week. We're expecting that we will have not only the 34 applications completed, but we will also have the ratifications from 38 states in 2016. So our countermand initiatives can start by the legislatures in 2016. But the 51 is the key. So here we need 34 state legislatures to apply on Congress. Okay, now we've got that as our goal. But we don't go into these 34 state legislatures with the idea that we need all of the legislatures. We need 51% of the legislatures in each state. So that means that there are 7,300 legislatures in the country, approximately. So 2/3 of them need to make application, but only 51% of the legislators in those legislatures are required to pass that resolution. Guess what? That's doable. We don't have to have millions of people supporting this. They've already voted for these people. They've already expressed their desire to have them serve them in some very significant way. And these legislatures then are in turn serving their constituents. And because there are so many different issues that can be addressed, they're actually giving their citizens liberties that they simply don't have under the present application that we have by the federal government in regulatory agencies in just one area. Okay, 51%. So the 34 states need to apply, 26 states or more need to pass the delegate resolution, but only 51% of them, of the legislatures, need to approve it. Then 38 states have to ratify it. Only 51% of those states have to ratify it. And then 51% of all three gives us the victory. That's why we can win. That's why this Countermand Amendment, a non-partisan Countermand Amendment, is so important. And ask God's favor on this. I am a Christian man. I don't apologize for that. And I do believe if the Lord doesn't lead us and guide us, you as well as us, that we're going to come short. And we'll not make this, see this nation restored as a constitutional republic. And my hope is that we can be restored to a God-fearing people one more time. Father, we come in the name of our Savior, Jesus Christ, and we thank you for this wonderful privilege. Thank you for Representative Kopanga, his part in the show tonight, and his patience with us, Lord, and also for the discussion that we've had. We commend it to you. We pray, dear God, that you do the work of your perfect will through it. Our purpose, Lord, is to protect this Constitution. It's to restore our constitutional republic, and also to help this nation brought back from the anti-God sentiments that have developed to a God-fearing people one more time. Give our brother and his family a great wisdom and skill and protection. God, I pray that you'll prosper him in all that he does, and the Legislative Assembly as well. And I pray, too, that you will prosper us. And thank you for the states that have sponsored us or are sponsoring, the legislators who are sponsoring us in the legislatures. Thank you for those that are looking favorable. And we commend to you what it is that we have to do that we will be successful. We ask it in Jesus' name. Thank you, folks, for being part of the show tonight. Again, Representative Kopanga, you've been a delightful guest. And I thank you for your insightful comments.
Welcome to the State Legislators Roundtable. Your host will be Charles Kacprowicz, Executive Director of Citizen Initiatives and Countermand Amendment. Our special legislator guests will be discussing important issues in their states that relate to federal encroachment on states' rights. The nonpartisan Article 5 single-issue countermand amendment can remedy many states' issues peacefully without the consent of Congress, the courts, or the executive branch. We will reclaim our constitutional republic soon. The nonpartisan countermand amendment is the missing piece of the Article 5 puzzle. Our nation is coming apart at the seams. So, we are countermanding.